We're reacting to this Aaron Hernandez, What Makes a Killer doc. Let's get into it.
What if you found out the Saints had like a $50 bounty on your head? Would you be pissed? Not really.
One of the most bizarre murder cases in the last couple decades is that of NFL player Aaron Hernandez. Some people tried to compare him to O.J. Simpson, but I don't think they're similar at all. When O.J. was accused of murder, he was 46 years old and had retired from playing football. That isn't the case here. To anyone reading the headlines, Aaron Hernandez just sounds like pure evil. But after watching this video, you'll realize that this is one of the most complex psychological cases I've ever broken down. On June 17, 2013, a jogger found the body of a 27-year-old man named Odin Lloyd, riddled with bullets at an industrial park in North Attleboro, Massachusetts, about a mile away from Aaron Hernandez's home. And by home, I mean his 7,000 square foot mansion that he lived in with his fiancée and daughter, the home he'd bought with his multi-million-dollar contract that he'd signed a year prior, the home of a man who seemingly had it all at just 23 years old.
People don't understand how good Aaron Hernandez actually was. Like, him and Gronk, that was a dynamic duo that was hard to stop from anybody in the league.
But 9 days after the body's discovery, Aaron was charged with the murder of Odin Lloyd, who turned out to be the boyfriend of Aaron's fiancée's sister, someone he'd personally known and spent time with.
Few have fallen as far or as hard as former NFL star Aaron Hernandez, the hands that caught so many touchdown passes in handcuffs today as he was led into court, charged with the brutal murder of his friend Odin Lloyd.
But during his time incarcerated, it also came to light that another two murders had been committed by Aaron a year before, as in July of 2012, he allegedly pulled up alongside a vehicle at a red light and fired 5 shots into the car, killing Daniel De Abreu and Safira Furtado. And in between these two murders, in February of 2013, Aaron allegedly attempted the murder of his own associate Alexander Bradley, shooting him in the face at point-blank range, which Bradley somehow survived and lost his eye. And this changed everything, because Aaron wasn't now just this one-time killer who could have been acting out of panic or defense. He was seemingly someone who'd been given millions and couldn't give up his desire for violence and murder. I wanted to figure out how a man becomes this way, what really went on for his brain to be shaped this way, the effects of his father, the effects of his closeted sexuality, the effects of the repeated head collisions giving him the worst case of the disease CTE ever seen in someone his age. How did all these factors allow Aaron Hernandez to supposedly murder 2 people, play a whole season of world-class football on the biggest stage, and then murder again? And figuring out the why in this.
Yeah, this dude was like a ghost from Power. If you really think about it. Like, I wonder if we can get 50 to make a doc about him, just like BMF, because this dude was literally living like Ghost from Power.
This case is far from a singular pinpoint reason. Aaron's brain was a boiling pot of factors that led him down this path of death and destruction. Aaron Hernandez was a child who was broken in multiple ways, most prominently by his father, Dennis Hernandez. In the household was Dennis, his wife Terry, and his 2 sons, DJ and Aaron. And the boys had to live in constant fear of the man supposed to love and protect them.
Would he beat your brother and you?
Oh, I don't think beat is really even the word that can be expressed. When you literally have to.
Due to YouTube's guidelines on child abuse, I'll keep the detailed descriptions of the violence on the Patreon version of this video, which is uncensored and extended.
God damn it, YouTube, but I understand.
If I could summarize the abuse described by DJ Hernandez to both boys without explicitly stating what happened, it was that of a father who lacked the ability to communicate in a healthy way and believed the only way to enforce discipline in the house was through violence. If anything wasn't up to his standards or anything annoyed him, then just giving the boys a talking to wasn't sufficient for him. And despite loving their father, they weren't able to feel safe.
It really has an effect on the way you approach situations in terms of communicating with others, because your safety net is in question because you don't feel safe.
I'm like torn about like how I feel about that, because I know they say a lot of serial killers and, you know, people who commit crimes were abused as kids, but like, how far can we take that excuse when someone allegedly murders 3 people? You know what I'm saying?
DJ even once threatened to call the Department of Children on their father. This was only met with even worse threats from Dennis. The violence wasn't only directed at the boys either, but towards Terry also. In DJ's book, The Truth About Aaron, he mentions how they would actually carry out violent acts towards each other, but Dennis, being the bigger, stronger male, would often get the better of her, and Terry would end up worse off. But here's where it gets confusing for a child's brain to comprehend. Dennis still showed love to Aaron. He still got him into football, took him to training, hugged and kissed him, and he was a present father. But this is quite a tragic attachment style to develop. Attachment theory essentially describes the template a child builds for future relationships from their earliest bond with a caregiver. Secure attachment is what forms when a caregiver is a reliable safe haven, when they do everything to make their child feel protected. But when the same person is simultaneously the source of comfort and the source of terror, when the person who's supposed to protect you is the one you feel you need protection from, the child faces an impossible bind, a state that researchers call disorganized attachment. The instinct to run towards the caregiver for safety collides with the instinct to run away from the threat, and the two can't figure out a way to coexist because it clearly doesn't make any sense to the brain. You're supposed to love this caregiver, but they keep hurting you. Disorganized attachment in childhood is among the strongest predictors of later emotional dysregulation, dissociation, unstable relationships, and, importantly in this story, aggression. Not only did Aaron love his father, but he idolized him. Dennis was very well known in the area and respected by many. So a father he idolized.
So basically, he was, his mind was, I don't want to say like destroyed by his father, but I can see the point he's making. Basically, the amount of abuse and like getting abused every day by your father, and then him still being an active father would honestly like confuse a lot of us. So I understand what he's trying to go for, like to break down the psychological aspect when it comes to Aaron. But yeah,
a father who brutalized him fused into one figure. A child in that situation doesn't learn that closeness is safe. He learns that the people he loves most are also the people most likely to hurt him.
I mean, in this picture, he looks kind of crazy, so that's
and that love and danger arrive together. When that gets carried into adulthood, that template makes it hard to trust anyone and primes a person to experience intimacy as a threat, a pattern that will repeat itself violently when we reach the killings and attempted killings of people he was supposed to be close to. But then what happens when that figure you both love and fear disappears forever? On January 6, 2006, Dennis Hernandez died unexpectedly at 49 from complications following what should have been a routine hernia surgery. In his book, DJ says he and Aaron literally watched them on as a flatline and watched the hospital staff attempt to bring their father back to life with no success. Aaron was 16 at the time. This loss is something that I, and even those close to him, believe was the major turning point for Aaron's trajectory. Dennis's death played two roles. The first was prolonged grief. Aaron not only lost his father, but watched him die a death that seemingly came out of nowhere. Normal grief is painful, but we tend to get over it. As our lives move on, it does too. Complicated or prolonged grief doesn't go away that easily. If the loss is too large, too sudden, or too complicated to process, instead of being mourned, it's usually pushed to the back of the mind in an attempt to avoid it. A sign Aaron did this was the fact he didn't cry at Dennis's funeral. There's no real record of him making remarks about his dad or honoring him in some way. He tried to avoid feeling the feelings that came with losing a loved one. But unresolved grief doesn't disappear. It leaks out sideways as behavioral change, identity instability, and acting out, particularly in teenagers who are still building the self that the loss has just destabilized. And that was the second role Dennis's death played, the loss of stability. That's the cruel paradox of Aaron's grief. The man who had terrorized him was also the only structure that organized his world. And when that structure vanished, so did the rails. He drifted towards a riskier social orbit, searching for the belonging and the discipline that had been ripped away. The main reason Aaron kept his behavior in check was because he feared Dennis. It was an external break stopping him from crashing. But with Dennis gone, and nothing internal yet built to replace it, the boy was left to regulate himself with tools he'd never been given. You might be wondering, but wasn't Terry still around? Wasn't she there for Aaron when Dennis died? I hate to judge parents because I understand parenthood can be difficult, but the actions Terry chose after Dennis's death can only be described as selfish and insensitive.
You made decisions that you don't like, that are the worst. I don't put you down and you my whole life up. You did. It is, but I forgave you and it's over with. Yes, you did. I was the happiest little kid in the world and you me up. And I just lost my father and I had to go to college and I had nobody. What the you think I was gonna do? Become a perfect angel? Oh my God! If I was with you right now, I would have probably punched the shit out of you. Like, I don't even know why you bring me to this level.
Explain.
So I can agree that his mother was probably not a good parent, especially when you allow the abuse to happen. Not that I'm saying that it was her decision because, you never know what abusive households, but yeah, I can see where Aaron's coming from. Like, he had no stability once his father died, and she provided none of that to help him as well. Not excusing what he would end up going to do, but it kind of makes sense when you're a 16-year-old kid and your disciplinary figure is unfortunately taken from the planet, but you have no one else there to fill that void. Hold up.
By DJ in his book, Dennis had an older sister named Ruthie who had a daughter named Tanya, and they used to babysit Aaron and DJ when they were kids. They stayed close as the boys grew older, and when Aaron wasn't training, he would usually spend time with Tanya and Tanya's husband Jeff, who in a short period had become Aaron's closest friend in Bristol. Jeff taught Aaron how to drive and how to fish. However, despite Tanya and Jeff still being married, within 12 months of Dennis's death, Terry steals Jeff from Tanya and lets him stay at their house. This completely breaks Aaron. When one parent dies, the other parent is supposed to be the anchor, the secure base that the grieving teen can cling to. But Aaron saw what his mother did as complete disrespect. She disrespected Tanya by taking her husband, and to Aaron, she disrespected Dennis by replacing him so quickly despite over 15 years of marriage. This broke his trust.
That means that they were like having that affair way before his father died, because there's no way 12 months later you still his aunt's husband.
In her, and made him feel like he'd not only lost one parent that year, but both. The person who should have helped him mourn became the target of his blame. But most importantly, it reinforced the worst lesson of his childhood, that the people you love and depend on betray and abandon you, that intimacy and danger are the same thing, and it accelerated the drift. With the family collapsed and home unsafe, he went looking for belonging and structure in a rougher social world. He moved in with Tanya instead, the maternal figure he actually still had respect for, but her house wasn't the safe base he needed. DJ said,
Aunt Ruthie and Tanya would allow anyone with a pulse into their house. Drug dealers, drug users, even convicted felons.
This is in fact where Aaron would meet the same men he'd commit murder with. It turned a vulnerable kid still trying to find himself into someone who now idolized the street life, who saw those guys as the ones with power and respect. But there was another event in his childhood that ruptured Aaron just as much, if not more, than Dennis's abuse. When Aaron was 6 years old, DJ describes another traumatic event Aaron supposedly went through whilst at their babysitter's house. It does pertain to sexual abuse on a child, again something I definitely have to leave the detailed events of to the uncensored Patreon version, but this violation completely shaped a huge part of Aaron's psychology going forward. It made him question himself for years. His defense lawyer George Leontire later stated that Aaron confided in him, asking if his sexuality was due to the abuse. Aaron framing it that way was a way for him to manage his self-hatred, because then in his mind, if the abuse made him gay, then it wasn't his fault. But that was just Aaron's thought process and justification, not what the research suggests. He saw the abuse as an injury and his sexuality as the scars from it. This led to a self-hatred he never ended up overcoming. And how could you when you look at his environment?
If Aaron had gone to your father and said, I have conflicted thoughts on my sexuality, what would your father have said?
I don't know if he would have been able to finish his sentence. I really don't. I can't imagine him even being able to, or my dad would have thought he could beat that out of him.
After Aaron's death, a high school teammate, Dennis Sansushi, spoke publicly about an intermittent sexual relationship between them that he said began in their early teens. A relationship both of them, he said, worked hard to hide.
Aaron and I had an on and off relationship from the 7th grade to the junior year of high school. Aaron participated with many people. I was a small piece of Aaron's activity. You mean to tell me that the quarterback and the tight end is gay? He sleeps with other men? No. Doesn't sit right with people. Doesn't sit right within our own stomach at that time.
But Aaron came from a household that completely rejected this idea, to the point of explicit homophobia.
Growing up in our household, my father was extremely narrow-minded, especially when it came to sexuality. He had his definition of a man, which can be very intimidating for a child You know, when my brother has all these questions going on about his sexuality.
According to DJ, when they were kids, Dennis said to Aaron,
Aaron, why do you stand like a with the hands clasped to your stomach and your elbows glued to your ribs? It's feminine. Are you a only stand like that? There are no in the Hernandez family.
DJ also said,
I remember he wanted to be a cheerleader. My cousins were cheerleaders, and amazing. And I remember coming home and like my dad put an end to that really quick, and it was not okay. My dad made it clear that he had his definition of a man.
adolescence is, in Erikson's developmental scheme, the state where identity is supposed to solidify, where a person works out who they are and integrates the pieces into a coherent self. But when core parts of that self must be hidden, the work can't complete. There's a heavy cost of concealing a stigmatized identity. You become vigilant to make sure no one finds out. You learn to compartmentalize a part of yourself, and it's exhausting to maintain a public self that contradicts the private one. Aaron learning to compartmentalize parts of himself is a skill he later applied on a public scale. Everyone knew him as a polite guy with a big smile, not knowing he was a violent killer. The self splits into a performed version and a buried version, and the gap between them grows the longer it's concealed. Aaron had to stay concealed. He had a father his brother described as rejecting anything he considered unmanly and took part in a hyper-masculine sport that punishes perceived softness. During the time Aaron was alive, no single NFL player had come out as gay or bisexual while still actively playing. It was a sport where you needed to be aggressive, and no doubt had homophobic locker room banter during those times. Aaron was not going to allow himself to be humiliated or looked at differently. Aaron was, on this account, building a self that the two most important forces in his life, his father and his sport, had taught him to despise. The public man was this charismatic guy who was a brilliant athlete, laid over a private self he had been conditioned to see as shameful. This would later manifest into a shame-rage spiral. Psychologists draw a sharp line between guilt and shame. Guilt says, I did a bad thing. It's specific and easier to get over. Shame says, I am a bad thing. It's your entire self, your identity, and a lot more intolerable. Because shame is unbearable, the mind defends against it. And one of the most common defenses is rage.
So basically, he was ashamed of his sexuality. He had nowhere to release that outlet because his father was homophobic, and the sport he played was, homophobic in the sense of the locker room talk. Okay.
The shame-rage spiral works like this. A person whose sense of self is already saturated with shame experiences humiliation or disrespect not as a minor social friction, but as an existential exposure, like someone is revealing the true, weak version of them, and rage rushes in to convert the unbearable feeling of being small into the powerful feeling of being a threat. Anger restores, momentarily, the self that shame was dissolving. Now, hold this mechanism next to the trigger that prosecutors said set off the 2012 double murder. A man bumped into Aaron and spilled a drink.
And one of the gentlemen was dancing, and his drink splashed up and spilled on Mr. Hernandez, and some got on myself as well. Once Mr. Hernandez turned towards the individual, kind of touched him on his collar and was like, nah, let's just get out of here, to avoid the conflict.
To a regulated adult, a spilled drink is nothing, maybe a minor inconvenience. To a man carrying a lifetime of concealed shame, a public slight can register as a profound humiliation that demands an answer.
Later, we walked back down towards the garage somewhat. Mr. Hernandez said, there they go, to catch up to the car, the BMW that passed. He removed the firearm from the glove box. He wound up saying, yo, again. And then they turned, and he was like, what's up now? Started firing shots into the car. He fired 5 shots. And the gun began clicking after. I heard like 3 or 4 clicks.
Clicks coming from the gun?
Coming from the gun.
The disproportion between the trigger and the response,
This guy literally was Ghost from Power. I don't care what you guys say.
spilled drink answered with a double homicide, is exactly the signature
He really killed 2 people, allegedly, because they spilled a drink on him at the club. Like, what?
of shame-driven rage. The chronic identity-level shame laid down in childhood became the fuel. Perceived disrespect became the spark. What was still missing for that spark to become deadly was a failure of the brain's braking system, some sort of mechanism that tells the brain to not do something impulsive. But that's exactly what the sport of football had taken from Aaron.
But you're playing an inherently dangerous game because you're asking larger men to run into larger men at a high rate of speed. There's only so many safety mechanisms that you can put in place because that's not what they made the human body for. The human body was not made to run into other human bodies at a high rate of speed.
This subject matter of CTE is what separates the Aaron Hernandez case from almost every other. Most violent offenders leave behind only behavior to interpret. Aaron left behind his brain, and what it showed was extraordinary. A healthy brain typically knows how to stop itself doing terrible things. The prefrontal cortex, especially its orbitofrontal and ventral medial regions, sitting just behind the forehead, is the brain's brake. It weighs consequences, inhibits impulses, reads social situations, and regulates emotion. If you're in a store and a random young child walks up to you and punches you in the stomach, your prefrontal cortex is what tells you, this is a child, so I'm not going to hit them back. Beneath and behind it, a limbic system, including the amygdala, is the brain's accelerator. It generates threat detection, fear, and the impulse towards aggression. In a healthy brain, the prefrontal brake exerts top-down control over the limbic accelerator. Anger rises, like from the kid punching you, and the frontal lobe vetoes the action it would otherwise produce. But if you damage that brake, the accelerator runs without restriction. Without the brake, you might just hit that kid back. Neurology has known for over a century that injuring the frontal lobe can transform personality.
I know I'm just trolling, but if a kid runs up on you and punches you in the stomach, just punch the parent back. Psych, nah.
The textbook case is Phineas Gage, the 19th century railway worker whose frontal lobe was destroyed by an iron rod. When he recovered, he was a changed man. He was impulsive, he was profane, and by his companion's account, he was no longer Gage. Modern medicine calls the syndrome acquired sociopathy or orbitofrontal syndrome. People with no prior history of antisocial behavior who, after frontal damage, become impulsive, disinhibited, socially reckless, emotionally volatile, and blunted in empathy. And this is the crucial bridge for understanding Aaron. It establishes a hard accepted fact. A brain injury can manufacture antisocial behavior. The question isn't whether such a thing is possible, it's whether it explains what happened here. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE as you guys probably know it, is a progressive, degenerative brain disease driven by repetitive head impacts, not necessarily diagnosed concussions, but the accumulated subconcussive blows that are routine in collision sports. MMA, boxing, ice hockey, rugby, pro wrestling, and of course, American football. Those impacts trigger a buildup of a protein called tau, which is present in a normal healthy brain, but when the hits cause it to release an abnormal amount, it becomes toxic and spreads through the brain, killing tissue over years. CTE is staged from 1 to 4, and it can presently only be confirmed after death. People often downplay CTE's effects on Aaron's actions, but the checklist of CTE symptoms is telling: impulsivity, aggression, a short fuse, emotional volatility, poor judgment, paranoia, depression, and progression.
I don't think people downplay the effects of CTE when it comes to Aaron per se. I just think that they feel like he had CTE, that played a factor, but he still allegedly, well, not allegedly, he murdered Odin Lloyd and allegedly 2 others. So was it just the football, or was it the drugs and all the other stuff that he was doing in his life as well?
Cognitive decline, and crucially, its earliest and heaviest effects happen in the frontal lobe, which is the brake I mentioned. When talking about their childhood in his book, DJ notes a couple events that stood out to him. One day when DJ was in 3rd grade, he and Aaron went into the woods in the backyard with their friends and started hammering a piece of wood into a tree. Why they were doing that, I have no idea, but while one of the friends was hammering, the rusted hammer flew backwards and smashed into the left side of Aaron's head. Blood came out of his ears and nose. He eventually got up and DJ had to clean him. When Aaron was 13, he went ice skating for the first time, and whilst going fast and not knowing how to turn, he crashed into the wall head first, and he was bleeding from his mouth. His teeth had fallen out and he ended up getting fake teeth. And even after being knocked out cold from a head collision on the field, he was still desperate to continue playing. This is on top of playing football since childhood all the way up until a professional level, playing a position where head-to-head collisions were frequent. He was in a primed position to develop it. After Aaron died in April 2017, his family donated his brain to the CTE Center at Boston University, where it was examined by the field's leading neuropathologist, Dr. Anne McKee. The findings shocked the world.
I can say that this is substantial damage that undoubtedly took years to develop.
I tried as hard as I could to live a dream life, but
I imagine
it didn't end well.
over maybe even as
Tell me how I could have tried hard.
His CTE was stage 3 of 4, and she claimed that this was the most severe case that the BU team had seen in anyone of his age, and that comparable damage previously found was only in brains of people at least in their mid-40s. His frontal lobe was hit hardest, affecting his judgment, impulse control, and ability to suppress his aggression, as well as his hippocampus, affecting his memory. However, I have to be transparent about Anne-Mackie's findings. She was explicit that she could not, in her words, connect the dots between the pathology and any specific act. You cannot take the disease and use it as an excuse for murder. But what she would say is that in the collective experience of researchers, individuals with CTE of this severity have difficulty with impulse control and decision-making, struggle to inhibit aggression, and show emotional volatility and rage. Here's the honest role CTE played for Aaron specifically. It almost certainly didn't implant a desire to kill into a previously peaceful mind. What it most plausibly did was degrade the exact neural machinery, the frontal brake I was talking about, that would normally restrain a man already carrying trauma-driven rage, chronic shame, escalating paranoia, and an easily triggered threat response. Returning to the car metaphor, the car was already accelerating, loaded by everything I'd mentioned prior to this chapter, and CTE is the failure of the brakes. A regulated brain might have generated the same murderous impulse in a moment of humiliation and then stopped it with working brakes. Aaron's brain, by this account, had progressively lost the part that stops. His inability to control his aggression started to increase over the years. In March 2013, his fiancée Cheyenne had to call police to report him punching a window in frustration after an argument, which cut his wrist in the process.
911, may I help you? Hi, I need an ambulance immediately. What did he use? He broke his arm, or he cut his wrist on the window. So did he break a window? Yes.
The following month, neighbors called the police after hearing yelling and the sound of items being thrown inside the house. Police records indicate the incident ended with Cheyenne agreeing to pack some belongings and Aaron leaving the premises for the night. But even from a young age, the signs were there. DJ said,
"We'd be having fun, talking and horsing around, and then as quickly as a light switch being flipped, Aaron would snap and start hitting me on the wrist with his controller, or claw at my face with his nails. Once he'd calmed down, I'd ask him what happened. D, it's like I black out, he'd say, with no further explanation."
But whilst I feel we have enough context to understand the double homicide in Boston in 2012, with Aaron feeling disrespected, humiliated due to that inner shame, and then unable to press the brakes on reacting violently, there's still a major factor we're missing in understanding the attempted murder of Alexander Bradley and the murder of Odin Lloyd.
He pointed out two gentlemen with low haircuts, and he told me he thought that they were police officers.
What did you say?
I told him if they are, it's because of the stupid shit he did in Boston.
To be able to just murder people in cold blood and then piece that aside and play in an entire league, an entire game, an entire whatever, and make $40 million is just absolute insanity. And it hammered home.
There were three factors that I believe were major accelerants to Aaron Hernandez becoming a murderer: drugs, validation, and paranoia. Aaron was a smoker. Quoted from the Boston Globe,
Dennis Sansucci told the Globe that he and Hernandez smoked a lot of marijuana. Before school, before practices, and after games. It would become the beginning of Hernandez's lifelong relationship with getting high, even before big games. Dennis Sansucci recalled the first day of junior year, walking with Hernandez near the school. "We were baked," said Sansucci.
DJ talks about Aaron's inability to stop smoking marijuana in college, which resulted in him getting suspended. Alexander Bradley said that marijuana was the reason they even developed a relationship.
I would bring him marijuana. That's what our relationship was at the beginning.
Did you see him smoke every day?
Yes.
How often in a day's time? How many times in a day's time?
Chain smoking.
Okay, and at some point you become friends?
At some point, yes. We were good friends.
Heavy cannabis use, particularly of high-potency strains, is associated with causing paranoia and blunted regulation. PCP is a dissociative drug specifically associated with causing agitation, aggression, distorted perception, and paranoia.
So the CTE, as long as I said earlier, with the drugs, really had the effect that made him act on these impulses of feeling disrespected. That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Obviously, people don't smoke these drugs to feel these negative effects, but they just happen to be side effects of the high that they're addicted to. But laid on top of an already disinhibited frontal system, these drugs don't just add their own effects. They compound an existing failure of control and amplify an existing tendency towards threat perception. Aaron's smoking affected him negatively in multiple ways. As self-medication, the drugs were numbing the untreated trauma, grief, and shame we spoke about in the earlier chapters. As neurochemistry, they were eroding what little frontal control remained and feeding his paranoia that would turn his friends into victims. After the 2012 Boston double homicide, Aaron seemed to take on an extreme case of what psychologists call hostile attribution bias. This is a tendency to read neutral or ambiguous signals as direct hostility. People with this bias assume others mean to harm or disrespect them, even when there's no evidence to support that belief. An example of this in day-to-day life is if you're at a coffee shop and you notice two people at a nearby table whispering and occasionally looking your way, you immediately assume they're laughing at you, though they may simply be engaged in an unrelated private conversation. But with Aaron, it was severe. He would assume white men in strip clubs were undercover police, and he armed himself with more firearms for protection. But then it went too far. Alexander Bradley was the driver when Aaron murdered those two men in Boston. That meant that Alexander Bradley was a witness, someone that had blackmail material on Aaron for life, someone that Aaron believed would turn on him at any moment, despite them being friends. So in February of 2013, whilst coming back from a night out together, Aaron shoots him in the face and leaves him for dead.
At some point during the car ride, Mr. Bradley, did you fall asleep?
Yes.
When you woke up from the sleep, what did you see?
Mr. Hernandez pointing a gun in my face.
And as you put up the defense gesture, what happened?
He fired a shot. He shot the gun.
Tell us about the phone call to Aaron Hernandez when you woke up that next morning.
I called him. I said, "What's up?" And he said, who's this? I was like, "You know who this is?"
And Alex Bradley surviving only worsened his paranoia. Bradley was a career criminal, someone just as capable of murder, and someone who voluntarily didn't snitch on Aaron when investigators asked who shot him, and instead told Aaron he would get revenge on him himself. Aaron's life had been completely consumed with paranoia. First about getting exposed as bisexual, then about being exposed as soft, then about the Boston killings, and then about Bradley getting revenge. We still don't have the motive as for why Aaron killed Odin Lloyd, but if Aaron believed he told Odin too much, like about his sexuality or about his murders, then through a paranoid lens, Odin then gets seen as someone who knows too much and therefore couldn't be allowed to live. But I also can't ignore the final accelerant Aaron had received his whole adult life, which was validation. He was rarely punished for the things he did wrong, and instead was rewarded. In college, he failed.
I think that's the biggest issue when it comes to this story. He wasn't punished in high school once his father passed, and obviously in college he was able to, the talent outweighed the problem, so he was able to, skirt past discipline.
Multiple drug tests and was considered socially immature by NFL scouts. He even got into an altercation at a restaurant which resulted in him bursting the eardrum of a bar manager whilst being a known college football player. Yet he still got drafted into the NFL on the same team as Tom Brady, arguably the greatest NFL player of all time. Then after the Boston double homicide, he gets away with it. The case goes cold and he gets a $40 million contract extension a month later. Then he shoots Bradley in the face, and despite the paranoia that came from him surviving, he still wasn't caught for it. So why would he be opposed to murder? If every time he was violent, it wasn't met with legal repercussion, why wouldn't his brain associate that with being the appropriate response to solve his problems? But that leaves me with an unsettling question. Did all of these factors combine to make Aaron Hernandez want to kill Odin Lloyd? Not just could they make him able to kill, but did they create a desire to do so? What I'm trying to determine is if Aaron's murders were reactive or instrumental. Was he just acting impulsively, or did he carry them out proactively and calculated, used as a means to an end?
I think for the double homicide, it was reactive to him getting the drink spilled on him. I think the Odin Lloyd one was more so Odin Lloyd knew he was bisexual. He did not want that coming out, so he figured to top all the loose ends.
With Aaron, all of his incidents seem to be a mix. In the double murders of Daniel D'Abreu and Safiro Furtado, two close friends and immigrants from Cape Verde, on the reactive side, we have the fact it was over something small, a spilled drink that Aaron perceived as disrespectful, driven by his shame rage cycle. But for him to then leave the club, get into the car, grab his gun, wait for the other guys to get into their car, and then drive by and execute them is far more instrumental. But it wasn't just the killing itself that made this instrumental, but the tattoo. The single most unsettling detail in the entire case is not about the killing itself, but what followed it. The trial evidence indicated that Aaron got a tattoo memorializing the double murder. There was 5 shots fired into the car before the gun started clicking, and Aaron got a tattoo of a revolver that holds 6 shots with 5 bullets in the chamber, with the words "God forgives," and it was written backwards so that it was only readable when looking in the mirror, almost as a reminder to himself. You don't memorialize an event you experience purely as a sickening loss of control. You memorialize an event you have, on some level, claimed as part of who you are. This is the detail that changes how you should view Aaron. It's not enough to say he simply snapped. The evidence suggests that violence was becoming part of his identity. It was something he wanted to be. With the attempted killing of Alex Bradley, you could say the paranoia itself made it slightly reactive, but it was still instrumental in the way it was goal-directed. He wanted to silence a witness. He went out to a strip club with him, pretending to still be his friend, and on the way back, shoots him in the face. That's calculated. With Odin Lloyd, the motive is unknown. Odin was the boyfriend of the sister of Aaron's fiancée, Shayana. He was 27 and played men's league football, meaning instead of getting paid, he had to pay a fee to play for his team. So having a highly rated professional in the family likely would have had him starstruck. He and Aaron spent time together, smoked weed, went to the club. There was a chance that whilst high or drunk, Aaron could have opened up about something he meant to keep private. He could have told him he was bisexual. He could have told him he murdered 2 people. He might have not done any of this and just had a separate issue with Odin. Whatever it was, he planned out this murder. It wasn't reactive and in the moment. He messaged him asking to meet up. He drove him to a remote destination, took him out the car, and shot him multiple times. Odin's body was left on the ground, riddled with bullets, not far from Aaron's home. Aaron's prior validation had made him feel that he could carry.
Yeah, Aaron, I think that was the dumbest part that Aaron ever did was, he murdered the guy right next to his home, basically. And come on, made it so much easier for the cops to actually find out who committed the murder.
Out this sloppy execution and once more get away with it, but this ended up being the one that had him locked up for life. So why did he seem to want it? A self-built on chronic shame is desperate for something that makes it feel powerful rather than small. A brain with a failing frontal brake cannot veto the impulses that follow. A world experienced through paranoia keeps supplying enemies, and a reward system reshaped by years of trauma and neurodegeneration can begin to attach a sense of potency, even relief, to the one act that reliably converts humiliation into dominance. That's the machinery by which a man does not merely commit violence, but comes to seek it. Violence had become the place where the version of him that felt shame briefly felt like the most powerful man in the room. In April 2015, Aaron Hernandez was found guilty for the murder of Odin Lloyd, and he had no emotional reaction to the verdict.
Charging the defendant, Aaron Hernandez, with murder. What say you, Madam Foreperson? Is the defendant not guilty, guilty of murder in the first degree, or guilty of murder in the second degree?
Guilty of murder in the first degree.
Madam Foreperson, by which theory or theories, deliberate premeditation and or extreme atrocity or cruelty?
Extreme atrocity or cruelty.
Damn, he really did not care either. That's crazy.
2 years later, in 2017, he was found not guilty for the double homicide of Daniel D'Abreu and Safiro Furtado in Boston, even though, with the evidence I've looked through, I strongly believe he did it. But for this verdict, he wasn't emotionless, and he cried seemingly real tears.
Victim Daniel D'Abreu, you find the defendant not guilty, guilty of murder in the first degree, or guilty of murder in the second degree?
Not guilty.
The verdict had no impact on his existing life sentence. He was going to die in prison regardless, so these certainly weren't tears of joy at the verdict itself. I believe it was multiple psychological things going on at once, but the main one is that the acquittal removed the last thing holding him together. The trial had been the organizing structure of his recent existence. It provided a fight, a purpose, a team with a shared mission, something to win. It was a lot better than thinking about sitting in jail forever, but then it ended, and here's the cruelty of it. He won, and the prize was nothing. The tears may have not been the end of his ordeal at all. They may have been the first crack in the final collapse, because 5 days later, he was gone. Aaron Hernandez took his own life in his jail cell, leaving behind his fiancée and daughter, but he also left behind one of the greatest psychological stories of recent time. As always with my videos, I like to find the why in understanding people's actions, and with Aaron, there definitely can't be a singular cause to pinpoint. A boy is shaped by violence and, by his family's account, possible sexual abuse, and forms a disorganized bond with a father he both worships and fears, learning that love and danger are the same thing. He is conditioned to despise a core part of himself, laying down chronic, identity-level shame. At 16, the one figure who organized his world dies suddenly, and the grief is never processed, only sealed. He carries the concealed self and the buried grief into a hypermasculine world, self-medicating with substances that blunt the pain while feeding paranoia and eroding control. And then, uniquely, he sustains the most severe case of CTE ever documented in a young adult. degrading the precise brain regions that inhibit impulse and aggression. Any one of these alone, most people survive. But stacked in a single nervous system, they produce a man whose threshold for lethal violence collapsed. He was able to kill because the neurological and developmental brakes had been compromised, a frontal lobe degraded by disease and drugs, and regulation never built in childhood. He seemed to want to kill because trauma, shame, paranoia, and a damaged reward and threat system had reorganized his inner world so that grievance demanded blood and violence affirmed the self that shame had consumed. However, none of this makes him a victim of his own crimes. Most people carrying even part of this burden harm no one. Their capacity for choice, however eroded, was not erased, which is why the law held him responsible and why my analysis of him does too. Odin Lloyd, Daniel Diabreu, and Safiro Furtado did not die of a disease. They were killed by a man. He was given the capability to be a killer, but still had to make the choice to be one. Does that make him evil? Well, that depends on your definition. So I'll leave you with that question.
All right, let me know what I should react to next.